Today we're going to learn how to use Scanner to read data from an input file, a text file in Java. This is a typical Java program to establish a connection to an input file such as input data.txt that will read information using or data using Scanner. But before I get into this part of it and how to establish the connection, there is another lesson that we need to learn. The fact is that sometimes your program may not be able to find this data file that we're going to be reading from. So we're going to learn a little bit about exception handling in Java before we get in here. The lesson is going to be pretty brief and quick, so we don't sidetrack too much from file I/O lesson. So let's review just a little bit about exception handling using try and catch reserved words in Java. Basically, there are two types of errors during runtime of your Java program. Type of errors that are not recoverable, things such as running out of memory. And then there are types of errors that are actually an exception in your program, such as dividing by zero. So your program might be able to divide two numbers, and if it reads a zero and divide by zero, it will crash, raising an exception, dividing by zero as an illegal arithmetic operation. What we're going to learn now is how to program in order to handle the exception without crashing. In other words, we're going to give a chance to our program to identify the exception that is being raised and is going to either output a message that there is an error in our input and exit, or continue with the rest of the program. So without going too much into details, let me just give you a few examples of how you can get an exception in your program. Just as we will see today, if your program issues a call to a file that does not exist, file not found exception will be raised. If the program attempts to write to a full disk, it will be same problem. The user enters invalid data, or the program attempts to divide a value by zero. All these are examples of how your program during runtime will raise an exception and exit the program. So let's see what we can do to handle these exceptions without actually exiting the program. This is a typical syntax for try and catch. Basically, anything that we think may raise an exception, we will put it inside the try block. So the try block here will include statements that may generate an exception. So for example, if we are dividing two numbers, and these two numbers are actually variables that are being read from the terminal, since we don't know what the denominator is going to be, we will put the division in here in case the user actually enters a zero. And once we put what we think might generate an exception, we try to catch the exception in the catch block. The catch block basically has the following syntax. It's very similar to an if statement. Basically states that catch if this type of an exception, and I'm going to discuss this in just a second, and we're just going to assign this class of exception to a generic object, and then the actions that we need to take in order to avoid crashing the program, we will put them in here. So let's take a look at an example. In this case, we are reading from a file, and I'm going to again explain this part later on. But the main thing is that we are reading from this text file. The question is, what if this text file does not exist? Therefore, we have to put this statement that may raise an exception of file not found inside the try block. Once we have this inside the try block, then we basically will create a catch block to handle the exception in case the file is not found. Now, this is an in case situation. That means that if it does find it, it's just going to ignore the catch block, and it's just going to continue with whatever needs to be done. So in this catch block, we have a class called file not found exception. All different classes for exceptions are listed in Java Oracle. You can go there and find them. They all have their own meaningful words. We are assigning it to a generic object called E. E does not play any serious role at this point of your programming. In advanced programming, there are informations inside the E that can be used for exception handling. But we are handling it in a very simple way. If the file is not found, basically we are going to output to the screen error writing or reading from the test IO, and then exit the system. System.exit 0 will basically exit the program gracefully without crashing, actually. So it will give us a chance before exiting to output why we are exiting the program, and then we exit. Now, if the file is found, it basically will continue in here. Again, a sample file IO exception handling. We are reading from this text file, and we are catching an exception, file not found, and then we continue with the rest of our code in case the file is found. So I'm going to keep this simple. This is the typical try and a catch block that you will be using in your file IO read and write. Today we are going to proceed with file IO reading from the file, and in my second tutorial I'll provide you with the syntax on how to read from the file. In order to understand file IO, I like you to always remember these two pictures. Basically, data source is a text file or a binary file. For the time being, we are going to only read from a text file. And this is our program. In order for our program to communicate with a text file, a stream, you can think of it as a pipe, need to be established between the two sources, your program and the text file. This is the key to be able to read or to write from a text file into a text file, I'm sorry. So in this case, anytime you need to read from a file, first in your program, you must be establishing a stream. What is a stream? It's basically a sequence of data. Once you establish the stream, and you can think of it as a virtual pipe. Once you establish this stream, your program can read one item at a time. What do I mean by one item at a time? That can be anything, depending on how you've set up your stream. It can read one byte at a time or one character at a time. For simplicity, we're just going to stay with one character or one line at a time, reading from the data input. Same thing with the file output. So if you are going to write or produce output of our program into a text file, we establish a pipe or a stream, but this time an output stream. And we send anything that we are producing to be written into a file. So now that we understand what stream means and why we need to establish the stream between the file and our program, let's see how we can do that in Java. This is a typical program to establish connection between a text file and the program, your Java program. Let's understand this syntax a little bit. We are going to use scanner to read from the file. So prior learning, this is nothing new that we need to learn. We are going to use the methods that we have learned. So we need to declare a scanner, name it whatever we want. In this case, I chose a meaningful name, file scanner. And we establish a null value for it. We cannot initialize it first. Before we can initialize this file scanner to a new object, we need to establish the stream. But the problem with establishing the stream is it requires a file, and the file